again, everyone. Welcome to the Brevard Christian Church podcast, home of the three mouths that talk. Hey, I am really excited. Mike, can I tell you how excited I am about this?
No, you may not.
Okay.
No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah,
Tell me,
I got to do it anyway. We are, and it sounds bad to say it this way, right? Because we're going to transition to the topic of evil. Why is Seth so excited about evil? Well,
okay, wait a minute. I know you were going to say that.
Okay.
I might have for my first thing.
Have you ever seen a good movie, like especially full of plot twists and stuff like that, and then you come to the end and you're like, whoa, this was actually a good movie. Like, man, this is really, really good.
Yeah.
And then you get to watch it again with someone who hasn't seen it, and you're like, oh, you're half watching the movie, but you're half watching them because you're like, oh, it's going to get so good. Some people ruin movies. Like you just can't watch with people like that, right? But it's so tempting sometimes to be like, oh, I've seen how this goes. Like, just hold on. This is going to be so good. Well, that's how I feel about this lesson. I have heard this lesson on the problem of evil, this discussion, and I've heard the end. And once you hear the end, it just changes your whole way of thinking about it, in my opinion. But I'm going to try my best to resist, to hold back, to not spoil anything, because I realize when we're talking about the problem of evil, we're dealing with a subject that is very personal, very, very deep, and some people have experienced this in ways that I, quite frankly, never will. Yeah. And so the last thing I would ever want to be is to be harsh or to just be, kind of gloss over some deep concerns there. So I think it's important to not rush through this topic. What do you think about that, Dad?
Yeah, I very much agree. And I also have to admit, I sure don't want people to think we're taking this lightly at all, because there are still people alive, and there have been people who have experienced far greater suffering than all three of us combined could probably even imagine. And so we don't want to make light of that, but neither do we want to leave it unanswered, because this often is the number one objection that people use, or they throw up, or they think prevents them from believing in the God of the Bible. And that's why I think it's very important to address this.
So is this kind of like the why does bad things happen to good people type?
Right.
That's what we're talking about, right?
Well, and you hear this brought up in many different ways, right? I'm just calling it the problem of evil, like a generic title, but I've had someone say, well, if God is such a good God, why did he allow my grandmother to die? She was such an amazing lady. There was just no reason for her to be taken from us.
Yes. I was listening to a series of debates. I haven't listened to all of them, but it was top-notch professors and invited intellectuals at Oxford University, of all places. And speaker after speaker on both sides, some defended belief in God and others were against believing in God. And then I tried my best to listen to their arguments, and this was the number one argument. In fact, the one guy they kind of built up to as maybe giving more powerful refutation, speaking against believing God, his argument pretty much built up to the punchline, and the punchline is, all you have to do to know there is no God is go visit a children's hospital and look at all the pain and suffering and the parents praying to a God who is not there, because sometimes they get better, sometimes they don't. So it does boil down to this.
And that's a heavy thing to think about, isn't it?
It is.
I mean, how could you nobody comes out of there smiling.
Okay, there's two things here. I want us to think about this because it is such a stumbling block, such a hurdle to too many people. Too many people. But at the same time, in the same breath, I would like to suggest that thinking about this problem, not only does it not present a problem for us believing in God, it actually is one of the strongest arguments for how great God's love is for us. So I want to say that one more time, because I think most people just miss this. Not only does the problem of evil not present a impassable, a problem that we cannot overcome as far as believing in God, this same problem of evil actually points to just how great God's love is for us. So let me kind of walk you through the way I went through this on a personal level, and I'll let you guys interject to make sure that I'm not glossing over lightly. We're making these points clearly, but this is the problem of evil light, as far as we are definitely just going to skim the surface. And I would encourage people, again, as far as making comments or contacting us, we are more than happy. We would love to deal with any questions that you've got, or maybe points that we need to clarify that you perhaps think we didn't make clear enough. So we're happy to address that. But let me go back to my school days. I was sitting in a classroom, Western Kentucky University, and a professor went up to the chalkboard before whiteboards. Whatever.
Hey, they're still around every now and again. You might catch one.
Nice
right?
scratchy.
Yeah, I love chalkboards. Anyway, he went up to chalkboard, and he wrote a syllogism, which is just deductive reasoning. Premise A, premise B leads to a certain conclusion. And so his first premise, the way he wrote it up on the board, is the first statement he said was, an all-powerful God could take care of evil. If he's all-powerful, he can stop evil. He can take care of evil. So he wrote, an all-powerful God could take care of the problem of evil. And then the next line was, an all-loving God would want to take care of the problem of evil. He said, we hear Christians all the time talk about God so loves the world, he loves us, he cares for us. So an all-powerful God could take care of evil. An all-loving God would want to take care of evil. But point 3 would be, evil still exists. So his conclusion is, therefore, the God of A and B, the God who's all-powerful and all-loving that you Christians claim describes God, does not exist. And so he wrote it up there in a very impressive way, and he didn't make any comments. He simply wrote it on the chalkboard, and he turned around and he stared at us. And so we're all looking at it and was like, okay. And the point he made was, it's a sound argument. If you take the premise the way it's stated, then you have to come to the conclusion, right?
It is a valid argument, you're saying?
It's valid argument. It's a valid
Sound
argument.
argument.
Yes,
Okay.
yes. Yeah, validity and soundness, let's use both terms because they often get confused. It doesn't just mean that the argument works in and of itself. It also means the argument's true if you accept the premises as being true, right? Okay. So, but here's the problem. And the reason I bring this up, it's not just the way I was introduced to this problem. A lot of people face this problem, and they just hit it from different angles. They say, I was in Vietnam, I can't believe in God, or I watched the news, I can't believe in God, or I lost my aunt, or some close friend of mine,
or my water cup on the floor.
Yeah,
Sorry about that guy.
Yeah.
or some
Karate
child,
kicked that thing.
Yeah,
All right.
some innocent child, something like that. Okay, they all boil down to this basic concept: an all-powerful God that Christians say the Bible teaches us nothing's impossible for God.
Yep, I believe
God.
that.
Yeah, Bible says that several places, right? An all-loving God, for God so loved the world, so he's powerful. He's powerful enough to take care of the problem. If he loves us, he'd want to take care of the problem, but there's still a problem. Therefore, there's got to be something wrong with our definition here. And their conclusion is the God that you guys believe in doesn't exist. When in reality, the real problem is the second premise. The second premise is that an all-loving God would want to do away with evil. And I really like laying it out this way because I really want to challenge Christians who don't seem to have a problem with evil, but they need to rethink their view of a loving God. Because God's great love, in fact, I said this at the beginning of this discussion, the problem of evil actually points to how great God's love is. And so I want us to go through some logical steps here, just some basic lines of reasoning, and we will look at some of what the Scripture says here. I try to base most of this on what the Bible teaches us. But this idea that God, as an all-loving God, would want to do away with evil, that's inconsistent with the love that is presented to us in the Bible. So let's go through it this way. It's often referred to as the free will argument. And again, 2 Peter chapter 3, verse 9 would be one classic place that undergirds the idea of man's free will, or Acts chapter 2, verse 40, save yourselves from this perverse generation. The idea is we have a say, we have a choice. We talked about this in previous lessons. I think the Bible pretty much endorses the fact that we've got a free will. Well, what are the implications of that? Well, here you go. You cannot have love, real love, without real free will. I'm going to try to just break this down to maybe just 3-4 steps at the most, okay? So each step builds on the previous step. So I want to make sure that this makes good sense before we go on, okay? Love and free will are correlative. Love and free will are tied. You cannot have one without the other. And here's I'm sorry, old illustrations, but as a kid, Saturday mornings for me meant no school, and it also meant my parents would let me watch cartoons, right? Okay, Saturday morning cartoons. And one of the cartoons I remember watching was Dudley Do-Right, Canadian Mountie, okay? And I don't know if that resonates with viewers. I don't know how many people are familiar with this or not. But as I recall, and I could have my facts goofed up here, but Dudley Do-Right was a Canadian Mountie, and he was the good guy. There was a bad guy named Dick Dastardly. Doesn't his name just sound awful? Right? Yeah, Dick Dastardly. He was always a bad guy. And he had a horse named Nell and a girlfriend named Penelope. And Penelope, it seemed to me, as I recall, every episode, Dick Dastardly was stealing, kidnapping Penelope because he wanted Penelope for himself. He wanted Penelope to like him, right? But Penelope loved Dudley Do-Right. So just about every episode, he would kidnap Penelope and tie her to the railroad tracks. It was kind of the classic scene, right?
As you do when you're courting a young lady.
Yes.
So here you go. I'm just a grade school age kid, maybe not even. You know, I don't know. It was a Saturday watching a movie, the cartoons, and here the bad guy has the girl tied up to the railroad tracks because he wants her to love him instead of the other guy, the Dudley Do-Right. And as a little kid, I'm looking at the screen saying, this guy's really stupid. I mean, I got it because I'm thinking to myself, if she should lift her head from the railroad tracks and say, Dick Dastardly, I do love you, would he be dumb enough to believe that? I mean, she's coerced. She's tied to the railroad tracks. Maybe a much better, simpler illustration would be if I took a gun and held it to your head and said, do you like me?
Yeah.
You know, doing things like that. Anytime you remove free will by putting a gun to somebody's head, tying them to a railroad track, it over makes the point, but I hope it makes the point. If you don't have free will, then that's not really love. Love requires free will. Does that make sense? Okay, so it doesn't have to be that extreme. And I do realize that sometimes the waters get a little murky here because sometimes people feel manipulated or pressured or things of that nature. But let me say it this way, to the degree that you eliminate free will, and sometimes you do that more than others, right? But if you totally did away with free will and it was just a program on a computer and the program every morning said, good morning, Mark, I love you. It's kind of like, well, okay, that's not the definition of love that most of us understand. Love requires a free will being making decisions on their own accord, right? Okay, now, you have to make that point clear because that point leads us to the next point, and that's the point about free will. It's not just love and free will are tied to each other. Free will, to be really free will, requires real free choices. That's easy to say, but again, let me use another illustration, and hopefully this will get us back to some theological concepts and where the rubber really hits the road for Problem of Evil, okay? Seth has a younger sister. I'll just go ahead and tell you her name's Jazz. I used to, maybe it's because Jazz came later in our family. Sometimes she got off a lot easier on a lot of things, but every once in a while I'd pick on her. And this is one of those issues I'd pick on her on. On her adoption day, we'd celebrate adoptions. And on her adoption day, she got to choose the restaurant we were going to go eat at that day. And so I would turn to Jazz when this only worked when she was really little, by the way. But I would turn to Jazz and I'd say, Jazz, it's your adoption day today. We are going to go out to eat. And since it's your adoption day, you get to pick where we're going to go. Where are we going to go to eat today? And I already knew what she was going to say. And inevitably, she would say, we're going to go to McDonald's and have Happy Meals. She just really wanted a Happy Meal. And I would say to Jazz, no, we're not. No, we're not. McDonald's is one of the places that you can't choose. But it's your adoption day, and you get to choose wherever you want to go. You choose. And she'd say, well, let's go to Burger King. And I say, no, we're not going to go to Burger King. We can't go to McDonald's, can't go to Burger King. But, Jazz, it's your day. Yeah. You get to choose. It's totally up to you. And I would keep going back and forth. And again, she was pretty little when this happened. Yeah. But I'd go back and forth until she got to some place I wanted to go. Nice. Right? Yeah. And when she would mention some place that I was in the mood to eat, then I would announce to the rest of the family, I'd say, hey, Jazz chose, we're all going to the pizza joint over here because it's her adoption day and she gets to choose. And with a big old smile on her face, she'd say, yeah, I got to choose. Until she got a little bit older and she'd realize, hey, wait a minute here. Right?
Getting over on me.
Yeah, okay.
Did she get to choose?
Dad was playing games with her. Some people think God's playing games with us. No, he's not. He lets us make choices he doesn't want us to make. It grieves God, and there's several examples of that in the Bible. Why? Because this free will choice is really free will. And for there to be real free will, it means inevitably some of those choices are going to be choices God doesn't want, and ultimately, if we knew better, we wouldn't want either. Bad choices, right? Okay. Before I go any further, we've only got one or two more steps here, but I want to go back. Why in the world would God allow us to make such dumb choices? Well, because if we're going to have a loving relationship, you got to have real free will. Do you see how already this points to how important this love thing is to God? He knew giving us free will would lead to some terrible choices on our part. And yet knowing that ahead of time, he still allows us to have that free will because that loving relationship with him is that important. Okay, so love and free will are tied to each other. Free will means real free choices. Not all of them are going to be good. The classic example of this, well, let me break this down. Before I give the classic example, let me say it this way. Some of those free will choices are going to hurt innocent people. Let me break that out, okay? Because I don't just make dumb choices that affect me. You know, sometimes I make good choices, sometimes not so good. It's not just me. And here's the classic example I wanted to mention. That's when the person drinks too much and gets behind the wheel, right? The drunk driver. And I don't know about you, I've heard more than a few stories about somebody being hit or somebody they knew was killed in an accident where somebody was intoxicated, right?
Yep.
Okay. You could even set the scenario up, some people going to a Bible study with a little innocent child in the back seat, and on the way home, a drunk driver hits him. Well, how do you explain that? Well, that particular example, it may not be satisfying, but it nonetheless fits. People had free will, and they made some choices, some of them stupid choices, bad choices, and as a result, evil took place. Somebody died, an innocent child. Okay, I think there's one more very important step that a lot of people don't think about, and that's this. We are not the only creatures that God has given free will to. We are not the only creatures that God has given free will to. Why is that so important to understand? Well, there's an angelic realm. There's a spiritual realm. We've alluded to this before in lessons.
Yeah, but before you get to that, because I don't want to rush this too quickly because I'm just anticipating some people may think, well, yeah, hold on, but I can think of exceptions to this. I can think of just plain accidental tragedies that just never should have happened.
Yes.
And it wasn't that, anyone was trying to do something evil, but you might have the pretty flower pot by the window of a tall building, and then the lady cleaning her window bumps the flower pot and it falls down and it kills somebody at the bottom,
Right.
But at the same time, I still think it's important to deal with the fact that even though our choices may be benign, someone had to think of the possibility or should have thought of the possibility of where that flower pot was put. That's a real world choice. And somebody designed this building in the first place. I mean, it's easy to play the blame game, but at the end of the day, what we consider to be just pure accidents or without intention doesn't make it any less our choice. We still have made choices that have real consequences.
Right. And I would broaden this out a little bit more. And I think we're going to deal with this under the last point, because there are some examples where it's kind of like the law of gravity or the way we're made, not able to breathe under certain circumstances and things of that nature. We'd say, well, there was no specific choice tied to that. Yes, but let's go to this one more point, and then we'll come back to those kind of issues that seem to skirt the direct choice issue, okay? And that's the point, that we are not the only creatures who have free will. Okay, in the classic passage here would be the book of Job, the first 2 chapters. The first 2 chapters of the book of Job give us a backdrop to the suffering and the pain that Job goes through in his life. And if you'll remember the story of Job, a blessed, wonderful, godly man at the very beginning when we're first introduced to him, and Satan talking with God. God says, "Have you considered my servant Job? There's nobody like him in all the land." Yeah. And Satan's idea was, because life's so good. If you let me make his life difficult, maybe he won't serve you so well. Okay. So at the second half of the first chapter, we have 4 calamities, and 2 of them involve bad people coming and, taking some of his possessions away. But there are 2 calamities in this first chapter that we know are caused by Satan, by angelic beings, evil beings, right? And one of them is, it's described as fire from heaven. We'd call it lightning, causing a fire, and he loses a lot of his possessions. And then a great wind or a storm or a tornado knocking down the home that his children are in, and they all die. Right. Okay, we would refer to those kinds of things as natural disasters. Yeah. And please, I'm not saying every natural disaster is caused by a demon or something like that. Yeah. But the Bible does open the door to the fact that there are spiritual powers, and not all of them are good. We see several, Daniel chapter 10, we see 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. There's several places where the Bible alludes to this idea that there are spiritual forces all around us, and not all of them are good, and they do interact with mankind, and sometimes do things like this. In fact, you get to the second chapter of Job, and Job's disease, his sickness, is caused by Satan. Yeah. Again, I don't want to say every sickness is caused by Satan, but we open the door that spiritual forces are sometimes involved, and they have free will choices, and they make free will choices to do evil things that involve us. Now, the reason I think this is important is that's behind the scene. It kind of goes to what we would refer to as natural causes. The book of Romans, the 8th chapter, says that nature itself groans waiting for its renewal. And it talks about the fact that sin, in fact, the book of Romans develops this from the end of the first chapter all the way through the 8th chapter, keeps coming back to this idea. Sin is not just something that puts us at odds with God legally. Right. It also affects who we are. We usually refer to that as corruption. But in the 8th chapter, it really focuses on the idea it's not just us. Nature itself has been corrupted. Well, does that mean that every tornado, every earthquake, every volcano is a result of sin? Not necessarily. However, possibly. Possibly. We don't know what this creation would be like if sin had never entered into the world.
That's right? So debated because people don't know, right?
Yes.
We just have no earthly idea sometimes what's going on in the heavenly or the spiritual realms, and so it's hard to... Yes. If I could interject a mildly humorous story, I guess it's not really humorous in the end, but... I think it fits what you're going at. I remember when my wife and I got our first home and we thought, man, we really need to, this is our first time out of Bible college in a home, we need to really try to reach out to our neighbors and stuff. We didn't know how to do that, but we thought we were going to try our best. And we ended up meeting one of the couples there. We kind of had a small connection with them. I had a similar business at the time. We both did that. And so I thought, I'm looking for any opportunity I have. And we finally got a chance. Our church was doing a small group series that was really emphasizing bringing in brand new people.
Right.
And so we thought, hey, this is our chance. We can invite this new couple. And we did. And we got them to come. And we were just so thrilled. I was kind of that nervous, like, oh boy, I hope it goes well kind of a thing. Yes. And wouldn't you know it, that very day, it was actually it was a step to a stage, I think, but it was pretty tall. I want to say it was like 4 or 5 feet tall, carpet covered with probably plywood and 2x4s. You know what I mean? Just kind of one of those things. It was obviously not the cleanest room we were in, I guess, at the time. That was leaning against the wall, right? We're all sitting in a circle. Well, the wife of this couple is sitting there, and I'm across, so I can see this from a distance. And you know how when something terrible happens, it happens in slow motion?
Yes.
That's what happened. I watch as this piece of stage leaning against the wall. It had been there for weeks, as far as I can remember. It had been there a long time. All on its own, started leaning out from the wall, leaning towards this lady, and I mean, it crashed on her head.
Oh, boy.
It hit her head good and fell to the ground. I kind of, and others jumped up, and she said she was fine, but it was that embarrassing shock or whatever. And they never came back after
Never
that.
came back.
Wait a minute. So
That's not a happy ending story, but what I'm saying is how it really did kind of bug me. Like, why did that piece just all of a sudden fall at that time?
Yes.
And maybe there's just a perfectly natural explanation. The AC kicked on because people were there, the stomping around or whatever. I think it was in this room with a hard floor, but it was just bizarre at that time that that had to happen. And that was kind of the embarrassment, I think, kind of ended that. So there again, I don't know.
Right. And I this is a very important point, and I hope I can state this clearly. All we have to do is open the possibility. We know that God has given us free will, right? We know that God loves us.
That's right.
But some of these other things, all we have to do is say there's a possible other explanation. And as soon as you open up the door to the possibility, what you have done is ruined, defeated the argument against God from the problem of evil. Do you understand this? Because you can no longer say an all-powerful, all-loving God, and there's evil in the world, it can't exist. Yes, we can say. Why? Because there's a possibility that this is happening. That's all we have to do. We don't have to prove the point. We just have to show it's a possibility, and we have defeated the argument against God.
Right.
But I don't want to settle for that. I want to go a little bit further. And just real briefly, because I see you're looking at the clock there, I just want to take the steps back.
Yes.
Let's just put it on the table. Let's ask ourselves the question, okay, this kind of world that's been corrupted by sin, people who've died in tsunamis and volcanoes and earthquakes and things of that nature, the great evils that have taken place in the world wars, you can think of all sorts of terrible things. Did any of this catch God off guard? No. Did God look down on this and say, wow, giving them free will would lead to all this?
Yeah.
Well, potentially, that's exactly what he said. Why would he say that? Well, to have love, you have to have free will. And so if you work your way back up, it just points to how impressive, how great God's desire to have a loving relationship with us is. And there's one final, just very basic thought that I think is so important to put here, and that's this. I know it's a evil, messed up world in a lot of ways, but it's a necessary world to get to a world where you can have a loving relationship with absolutely no evil. You have to have an evil, potentially evil world like this world first. So not the best of all possible worlds, but the prerequisite world to the best of all possible worlds.
Okay, we're going to explore that next time. Thanks for being with us.